I'm going to go ahead and start our recording. So, because it seems like we're kind of missing some good, discussion and stuff that in our group. So, yeah, I think that's right. We were talking a little bit about this lecture 182 called The Process of Meditation, and Jacob was sharing a little bit about how it's similar and was more developed in sort of internal family systems. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, internal family systems therapy.
Yeah. So here comes Jasmine. And, I don't know that theory in depth, but, I think that it was part of my puzzle as well, like the limitation to the three voices and the particular designation of one of the voices as the lower self child. And, so like there's some interesting, I think, ways of approaching, how the guide is presenting it. But, I think there are many different, many voices in the, Brazilian culture, like everything, every state of consciousness. And the guide says this because it's basically spiritist, right? The spirits say this, that every, emotion, every, thought form, it's like it's all being in some way. And so they're all parts. And there's, a way that, different, even in our internal family systems, in their system, you would say, certain aspects of those internal family systems are possessing us, right? And that we're kind of trapped by them, or we're caught in them. And so they would, have like different approaches, based on sort of, it's a slightly different model, but yeah, parts.
Right.
And yeah.
Right. IFS, we call it being blended because they are leaning away from more of the spiritual language, probably. Although he often talks about that there's a spiritual aspect to this, and as he explored it much more deeply, he called it spiritual. But yeah, I think it's referred to as blended, and which part of you basically is holding the wheel of your consciousness. So very similar to kind of being possessed, but possessed kind of has a bit more of a
right.
devilish.
Wouldn't be a therapeutic word that you would use.
Right,
yeah. So yeah, and I think it's all nuances of how you slice the pie, but I think there's value in looking at it in these different ways, and especially developing that observer aspect of the ego, and learning how to sit with and not try to suppress or reject all of these voices, right? And sort of let the positive adult ego come in and begin to invite in and work with all of this. But yeah, so should we go ahead and put the lecture on the screen? Let's see.
Hello, Jasmine. Glad you're here.
Hi, Frank. Hi, everyone. Me too. I'm happy to be back.
Welcome. So this lecture was originally delivered May 8, 1970. It's lecture 182. And its original name, the title, The Process of Meditation. And then it became known as the Meditation for Three Voices. And as I was saying, I think many people have adapted this and worked with this and found ways of kind of, making delivery systems for comprehending and actually experiencing, because that's what we're always trying to do, is bring these lectures into experience. And we were talking about some other systems that do similar work. And I was also thinking about even the family constellations, is another kind of way. And then, of course, ancestral healing kinds of things, I think also are tapping into, different levels of our being and aspects of, our programming and all of that. And so the pathwork being a path of self-knowledge, right, is kind of like the more that we can understand all of these parts. And then in a sense, the part of us that's curious, that's understanding, that's looking at, becomes the real self, the central sort of aspect of self, and the others, become, the parts that can be integrated through that, so it's an interesting, almost, also similar way of working, I guess, with multiple personalities or something like that. There's a kind of way that, in my sense, we are, using both the adult ego and the higher self to kind of, and that's what the guide is saying, re-educate, the child. And so let's begin. Greetings, all my friends here. Love and blessings, help and inner strength are coming forth to sustain you and help you open up your innermost being. I hope you will continue and cultivate this process so that you bring to life your entire being, all levels of your being, creating wholeness in you. So here it sounds like he's acknowledging that there's many levels of being and more than just these three beings or these three levels or whatever. But in tonight's lecture, I want to talk about meditation. I've spoken about it before. To really understand the dynamics, the meaning and the process of meditation and derive the maximum benefit from it, you must be clear about certain psychic laws I have discussed elsewhere. One is that 3 fundamental layers of personality must be involved if meditation is to be truly effective. So, in this way, it's a way of looking at kind of fundamental layers and not all aspects or parts, you could say is a bit of the approach here. And I think there is sort of a true, value in looking at what I would say would be the lower self, the adult ego, and the higher self. And that's kind of how they actually named it at one point. But there is this understanding of the lower self, like we think it's a moral judgment and it's like our badness or our opposition to God, which in some ways it is. But it's really our free will, right? It's also, like sort of, it's not something that we have to correct, right? And it's something that we have to get conscious of. It's like I like to see it as the first 3 chakras, right, which are dealing with our fundamental physical survival, our emotional and desire nature, fulfillment, and our ego and sense of self, sort of also fulfillment. So these things, while there's higher levels, they're not to be diminished or dismissed, but they do need to come sort of under the dominion of the higher self and the adult ego. And in some ways, and in many ways, the guide, like even in this lecture, talks about the lower self child. So, it's kind of like more to me like our pathological adolescent aspects, right? Like there's a part of us that's, I think even in culturally, we are trapped in adolescence. And we don't want to, part of it is we don't want to do this, kind of journey of descent into, Soul Canyon that I've been reading my friend Bill Plotkin, and he talks about this, and it's very similar to Pathwork as well. I think he claims that there isn't any other path that includes this, and in some ways he's right because the way he's broken it down. But once again, I find it also in the Pathwork. But we really, in order to grow up, have to go through this transformation process. And it's almost like in insect world, the same transformation from adolescent or, what do they call a caterpillar stage, right? It's a larval stage into the full adult stage, which is the butterfly, right? And how nature does this all the time. It's like these very uniquely distinctive, very different beings, right, on different planes of existence. And, and in some ways, we even have examples of this being done on a collective level where, like cicadas kind of all at one time, in their particular line, come and make this transition in a collective way. So I like to think that in some way that's what we're talking about here, and that there is this, work that the guide is preparing us for to, let go and make this, deeper, process to becoming full adults and becoming the butterflies in the world instead of the caterpillars. So, so to understand the dynamics, the meaning, and the process of meditation and derive maximum benefit, you must be clear about these psychic laws. And then he goes on to list them. Number one is that the ego level with all, we have to involve all of three of these, in order to make the meditation truly effective. The conscious ego level with all conscious knowing and willing. And basically, we want to get below the story that the conscious ego level knows. So we have to invite in the truth of the unconscious egotistic child level. So in some ways, this is a process of trying to go deeper into unconscious levels of our being that we may not understand fully. We may not, we may just feel and not have rational thought around, or, it may be pattern and sort of we just don't understand it at a rational or conscious level. But all of that is, important. And he's talking about, this egotistical again, it's egotistical is immature, right? It's third chakra. So we're trying to come up above the third chakra, to evolve up into the mature self that is centered, I think, in the heart. And so we're having to transform from a more childlike, state, where, we hope that we can get our way all the time, or, we can, like it's all about us, right? To something larger. So, and of course, this child level, it has ignorance, it has destructiveness, often unconscious. It wants what it wants, that's self-will, it creates, problems in the larger circumstances. If you've ever seen, parents trying to deal with a young child screaming in the grocery store because it didn't get a piece of candy it wanted or something, it's like these things are, I think, part of it. So we're including that, and we're including the superconscious universal self with its superior wisdom, power, and love, as well as with its comprehensive understanding of events in human life. So does that, anybody want, does that make sense? And, like there's this, dialogue between these three main aspects. Does anybody want to comment on that in their own experience, how that's worked for them or how they've experienced it? Maybe that's a little premature question. I don't know. So, in effective meditation, the conscious ego level activates both the unconscious egotistical destructive self and the superconscious superior universal self. A constant interaction among these three levels must take place, requiring a tremendous amount of alertness on the part of your conscious ego self. The conscious ego must be determined to allow the egotistical unconscious self to reveal itself, right? And a lot of times it's in hiding because it, comes up against our unconscious judgment of it, or our repression of it or whatever. So we really have to kind of switch and make room and invite out maybe these parts of our shadow that we don't want to see, we don't want to recognize. And we want to, ask it to unfold, to manifest in our awareness and to express itself. And sometimes I know in the work, we think often, you can do journaling, and let it speak that way, or in a session, you can just speak it, but also, sometimes it wants to express more, energetically, more physically, right? So Sometimes I'll feel the anger welling up and I'll want to, move the emotion in an expressive, thing. And then maybe as I'm doing that, my voice comes in and I'm, hearing myself, say something, and I can tell like I'm channeling the energy of that, pain body, that unconscious part that, I'm welcoming to come out, not to take me over or for me to identify with, but to see it and help it. It's difficult because of the fear of not being as perfect, as evolved, as good, as rational, as ideal as one wants to be and even pretends to be. So that on the surface of consciousness, the ego becomes almost convinced of being the idealized self-image. This surface conviction is constantly counteracted by the unconscious knowledge that this image is untrue, with the result that secretly the whole personality feels fraudulent and terrified of exposure. So here we get into kind of vicious circles and, different ways that we get all tangled up in this stuff, right? It's a significant sign of self-acceptance and growth when a human being is capable of allowing the egotistical, irrational, outright destructive child to manifest in the inner awareness and acknowledge it in all its specific detail. This alone will prevent a dangerous indirect manifestation. So, does that, resonate with people? Is there, to me, like this, the self-acceptance here, like we want self-knowledge, we want to invite the unconscious out, but, if it comes out and we, recoil from it or judge it or reject it, it's like, it's not going to continue to manifest for our understanding. And so it's like tricky because we often have difficulty accepting all of these parts, but that's kind of critical. So the egotistical infant's antisocial desires and claims, convictions, and attitudes must be exposed in exact detail. It seems hard to accept that there is something in you that is so very different from the way you want to be and the way you think of yourself. So the meditation must constantly encourage this self-revelation, not only in a general sense, but primarily in specific daily situations that are unpleasant or unsatisfactory. And this has always been a little bit of a puzzle to me in these lectures, because as I read this, I don't know if I'm projecting or not, but I have this kind of sort of sense that yes, we have to face, these darker parts of ourselves, and when we do, somehow it's like the self-revelation is, something that, then we do judge in ourselves. And every time I've done this, when I've really sought to understand these parts in me, the ones that are acting weird or crazy or, whatever, like when I've really followed them to the core, I don't end up in a judgment of the lower self child. What I end up in is understanding, some kind of trauma and some kind of confusion in the child, and understanding again that the child is, only trying to survive. But that doesn't make me at all feel judgmental. It makes me feel really compassionate and understanding. And I think that is a part of sort of opening this inner flow of connection between ourselves, right? And to, begin to show up instead of the, inner tyrant of the, idealized self-image, as this more mature adult ego that's, like really working now in harmony with, transformational processes and purposes. So the conscious ego has to reach down and say, whatever is in me, whatever is hidden that I ought to know about myself, whatever negativity and destructiveness there is, should be out in the open. I want to see it. I commit myself to seeing it. regardless of the hurt to my vanity. I want to be aware of how I deliberately refuse to see my part wherever I am stuck, and how I therefore over-concentrate on the wrongs of others. This is one direction for meditation. And here the guide is being sort of general, which is, fine. I mean, we can go in, but I think a lot of times our life is actually reflecting that to us if we're paying attention, and so it can be more specific, ideally, than this, that we're, working with it. The other direction must be in the other direction of, like connection with, wisdom or support, like this meditation for three voices. So the adult ego has to reach down and connect with, the lower self and the, aspects that, are needing re-education and healing and help. And then it must also reach up to the universal higher self, which has powers that surpass the limitations of the conscious self. These higher powers should also be called upon in order to expose and, help see the destructive little self so that resistance can be overcome. The ego will alone might not be capable of accomplishing this. But we can, and, like it's the willingness, right? We may not be able to make ourselves do it, but that's really not the critical key. The critical key is our free will, our true choice, right? So we may not be able to affect it, but we can ask for it. We can choose it. We can ask for it, right? And then that way the higher powers can help us in ways that, we unconsciously are not availing ourselves really of, because sort of, again, the egoic sort of adolescent egoic consciousness, kind of, it's exploring itself. It wants to do it all itself. It doesn't want, it's like it's getting away from the family, doesn't want to ask for help, right? So there's a kind of, difference in the movement, right? Where in the adult ego, we sort of understand, like that we can see this, we can bring it up, and we can, make our choice. And sometimes it's hard even to go to that place where we're choosing that, because we're attached, we're addicted, we have other, agendas in the other way. And so that all has to get worked through as well. So the universal consciousness can be asked to help us understand the expressions of the destructive infant correctly, right, without exaggeration, so that you don't go from ignoring it to making it a monster. And that's often, like part of, like that the higher self, can hold this place also and help us find this place of acceptance and compassion, for all of the different expressions that we have for our humanness. So a person can easily fluctuate from an outer self-aggrandizement to a hidden inner self-deprecation, and when the destructive infant reveals itself, then we can fall prey to believing that this destructive self is the ultimate sad reality. I mean, most of the time, I think we're unconsciously, sensing that it's there, and we feel that way all the time anyway. But, and actually bringing it into consciousness and seeing what it is like, and actually understanding where it comes from is a relief, right? But I can understand what the guide is saying here, that, it's sometimes a process, right, to face and, recognize and come to integrate all of this aspect. So for a complete perspective on the revelation of the egotistic infant, one needs to ask constantly the guidance of the universal self. When the infant begins to express itself more freely, because the ego allows it and receives it as an interested, open listener, collect this material for further study. What reveals itself should be explored for origins, results, further ramifications. What underlying misconceptions are responsible for the overt self-destruction, the hate, the spite, the malice, the ruthless self-will. When the misconceptions are being recognized, guilt and self-hate diminish proportionately. So, I find that this is, like really true and a key, like, as the infant begins to express itself, like then we need to, really get involved in a deeper dialogue and keep asking and, looking for ways of drawing it out further, of understanding, the different layers that, are involved. And I think, again, one of this is a kind of conceptual presentation and doesn't really speak about sort of the energy in the body, which, emotions are basically that, right? But emotions also contain our story, right? And so it's good to work with the energies in the body and to recognize, also the energies that come with the story. And kind of see the hold them, because when we can just be with the energies, there's another communication and another level of understanding that I think comes from that. And the misconceptions that are often, hidden in all of this, that it needs to be seen, right? But it's interesting because when we sit in the energy of it, we actually kind of come in direct contact with these thought forms or with the understandings, and it feels like it's not like we're learning, remembering it in our concepts, but we're like here in the moment with it, really seeing it once again. So it feels really embodied, and like in a way it almost feels to me like we need to keep impressing what the guide calls the soul substance, which I think in a way is partly in the body, right? With this. And so, each time it feels like it sort of gets embodied a little more. And maybe it also then is now affecting our epigenetics, right? We're impressing our epigenetics with Pathwork. Think about that for a minute, maybe. So
I've never heard that word.
epigenetics.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so recently, like for a long time, there was this big argument about nurture versus nature, and was the genetic code, like kind of, affected at all by like trauma in the past, right? So now they've actually found out, yeah, like the trauma of our ancestors, I think 3 or 4 generations back is still retained in the gene.
Oh, so that's what epigenetics means.
And so it's how our life experiences impact our genetic code. It's not just that our genes create create who we are in our life experience, and then also it's like our ancestral, so it gets passed down. And so it's part of, I think, the ancestral trauma, only now that's kind of at the physiological level of it.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so, if you think of what we're doing is kind of the opposite of that, it's not trauma. We're trying to like sort of, the guide always talks about imprinting our soul substance, right? So maybe that's like, so epigenetically imprinting pathwork on our genes as we study and try to live it or something.
Just for the sake of simplicity here, so far, I feel like what we're dealing with is like 5 parts of our personality. We have the idealized self-image and the immature ego, which basically have a stranglehold on the lower self, right? And then we have the mature ego, which is trying to activate the higher self. Correct?
I think those parts, but I think the mature ego is also, working to, like let speak, the lower self, the two, and including, I think, yeah,
Release
idealized
the
self-image,
mature
but
ego is also trying to release the lower self from the grasp of the highest
idealized,
self,
right,
idealized self-image and the immature ego, which doesn't
right.
want to be seen as less than or incompetent or destructive in any way.
Right. And so, it's kind of like, what does, if we think of that as traumatized or child consciousness, or, hold that in, understanding and compassion, that it's kind of, stuck with this. It probably doesn't really want to be there either, but that's kind of how it's learned to survive or learn to, manage itself, and so it's kind of its go-to, it's, conditioned reflexive response. Like what we want to ask, and I think in the, meeting that within this meditation, and calling forth the higher self and listening deeply to who it is, what it, what to determine like what could help it, how can we lead it out of that very darkness, right? How can we help the, part that's so terrified of being exposed and has been shamed? How can we re-educate that and say, it's okay, you can let go, it's like there, you are the one, you're not the one to be shamed, nobody, I'm not shaming you, it's like, it was probably that you took on this shame because, it was passed down shame from somebody else's shame, it's not your shame. And so we can really, like, if we have this relationship with that child from within, and we can also, invite the higher self, if we don't hold that part fully ourselves yet, then it can still be imparted. And you can literally feel, to me, inside, the receptivity of the child part to this. And so sometimes, if you're not meeting it where it needs to be met, it won't be receptive. So you're listening, oh, it's there's resistance, it's not taking this in, it's not. And then you have to go back to the drawing board, like, okay, higher self, how do we, connect here? Or what does this part need? So there really is this kind of, it's almost like, the ego is becoming its own helper for the inner child, and calling on also the guidance and the help from.
Yeah, but the releasing of the lower self, or the child, the wounded child, for me sounds more like a processing moment than it does a meditation. Meditation almost sounds like a misnomer for the action,
So here is an very interesting point, Frank, because it's exactly the way that we were originally, did Pathwork, and sometimes I still think it is also needing that, right? It's like, but a lot of the releasing that we did emotionally in that way, I would call like more like psychodrama, and it did include the story, and I think you need to do that some. You need to do that enough to get into it and feel and know it, But I think a lot of people sort of ended up sort of like feeling recycled in that as well. And I think that there is a way, and this is something I learned in working, with the plant medicine and stuff, that this consciousness and this feeling and this voice, and all of these beings inside of us, they are also energetic. And so we can sit quietly and feel and talk to them and even hold them in their pain. Aggression often needs to be put out directly, but aggression is usually just a stage anyway. So the guide says sometimes you can, just feel the pain underneath the defense of the aggression, right? So if you can get to the pain, if you can hold, like the energy in compassion and keep calling light or keep knowing truth, right? Literally the same energy that you might discharge with a tennis racket or with a great big regressive childhood scene, not saying that we shouldn't do those at least a few times, but at some point you can really actually work all of that in a meditative form.
Okay.
It's like a kind of a more like a mindful thing, and it's like working more subtly with the inner energy expressions.
Yeah.
And they exist in, and the guide says, they can, like even the images, like they have observable form in us, and we can feel and see them inside, energetically. So, but yeah, I think, a lot of times it helps to kind of practice, and some of the work that I do kind of just leads people in this way, because I kind of found this also working on Zoom, right? And we didn't have a way to do a lot of that. And so this works, and people can go pretty deep with it usually. And can again invite the whole inner exploration, and the voices and the feelings can be there, in the softer way with this. And so this is why I like this lecture, because it kind of to me describes exactly that, and in that way, is more meditational. So
Do you think it's possible to absorb this method before you ever experience a true hard process moment?
I think you can do the process, but I think it's helpful. But I think that if you have never done like this complete kind of regression, like there's a way that we bind our energy, and there's a defense in our physical system. And one of the things I do in this form of meditation is I work a lot with just observing and relaxing where we're holding, because anywhere we're tensing in the body is where we're tightening against energy flow. And where we're tightening against energy flow, it's not going to move, and we can't get to the bottom of it, so to speak. So there's a way that getting to the deep regressive work sometimes requires more energy, like the group container, maybe some core process or some kind of building of the charge to drop to that depths in certain situations. But it depends on the person. It depends on, like the level of work that they've done, types of work. So, it's,
And if they're even if that environment is even available to them, the group
right,
is even available.
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so, and it's surprising to me. I think, in some ways the universe, will make a veil when a person needs something, right? So if all they can do is come to a Zoom group and do this kind of meditation with me, I think usually they're getting something out of it. It may not be taking them all the way, or, but little by little, step by step. So it might be where they're ready to go.
Mm.
So meditation must deal with the entire problem of unconscious negativity step by step. The interaction is threefold. The observing ego must initially want it and commit itself to reaching in and exposing the negative side. It has also to ask for the help of the universal self. When the infant reveals itself, the ego should again ask for the help of the universal self to strengthen the consciousness for the further work, which is the exploration of the underlying misconceptions. And so, understanding, how we, what the misconceptions are, and then so importantly, the heavy price that we pay for them. So a part of this is going in and really seeing, like how the pseudo solution doesn't quite work and has some really serious side effects. In fact, those side effects are kind of killing us and killing the life that we came in to live, so and yet, sort of like, again, not over moralizing or making it a heavy duty thing, right? To just face fully, and make our prayer, and recognize and make our choice from a different place, the realization, of what's happening. And then that choice is so powerful. And then the universal self can help. And it will, work with our addictions. It will work with all of our destructive impulses, all of our defenses. Such giving in does not necessarily result in what? I lost that. The universal self can help if you allow it to overcome the temptation to give in and again and again to destructive impulses. Such giving in does not necessarily result in action, but manifests in emotional attitudes. I'm not quite sure I followed that line, but certainly, there is a temptation, and we've all experienced giving in again and again. to destructive impulses. And, in some ways, I don't even experience it in myself. It may be some level of lack of self-responsibility, but with PTSD, right, it's almost like it's below the level of conscious choice, right? And it's wired in the unconscious, it's wired in these reflexive actions. And so like I am, already in my destructive impulse to some degree. The key for me is like realizing that and again, not moralizing, but just waking up to it and trying to find how inside of myself I can retake possession of myself, because in that moment I am possessed by this other energy that is my series of defenses that I internalized from trauma adaptation. So I think it's kind of universal that we're doing that kind of thing. Does that sound right? This type of meditation requires a great deal of time, patience, perseverance, and determination. Remember that whenever you are unfulfilled, wherever there are problems, wherever there is conflict in your life, your attitude should not be to concentrate with woe on others or circumstances outside your control, but to reach into yourself and explore the causes embedded in your own egocentric, childish level. Meditation is an absolute prerequisite here. It means ingathering yourself, calmly, quietly wanting to know the truth of this particular circumstance and its cause. And then you need to quietly wait for an answer. In this state of mind, peace will come to you even before you fully understand why you have a particular negativity. This truthful approach to life will already give you a measure of the peace and self-respect you lacked as long as you held others responsible for what you had to suffer. So I want to back up a little to the earlier part of this where he's saying, to ingather yourself and calmly, quietly wanting to know the truth. It's like that. But again, I find that you can embody that exact instruction by tuning in to, like your energies, where is there resistance? Where is there heaviness? Where is there agitation? Where is there, some, disharmony in my, both physical, but more like a little higher. It can be all, interconnected, but, there's an energetic layer and an emotional layer and then the physical layer. And so you can feel, these energies. And a lot of times what you're feeling is the resistance, like is the block in the body, the no, and that is what, he's saying that we have to work with. So, you can go in and just notice, oh, I see you, tight muscle right there, like, and be curious, like, why do you feel like you need to hold yourself that way? Right? Because it's kind of happening habitually, unconsciously, at least in this moment, it's right there, right? And so you can gently invite it to explore this question also by letting go a little and see what would happen. Right. So sort of inviting relaxation, not demanding and not trying to make it happen, but just, speaking directly to another part of yourself, not your, maybe your lower self child, but in this case, it's like a tight muscle that you're talking to, right? Or an energetic state of agitation or something like that. And you can have like really deep communication with all of these energies inside of you. And then, when you're talking, if you again are, you ask and then you listen, by paying attention to the energy itself, it's in various different ways that reveals or answers, it's lots of different ways that we kind of understand it. Sometimes even you can exaggerate it, like, make it stronger and see, well, what am I doing? Embracing and holding against, and what would that connect to, kind of thing. So there's just different ways that you're just sort of excavating. I almost feel like it's a kind of archaeology that we have to do within ourselves in a sensory moment, present moment, exploring this aliveness in our body and the places where we constrict, contract, that kind of thing. And so you can do this meditation for those three voices at that level. So then as we, come to, more relaxation, peace can come maybe even before we fully understand what the particular negativity is about. And also this truthful approach to life gives us a sense of self-respect and peace. So if such meditation is cultivated, you will discover a side of yourself that you have never known. In fact, you will come to know two aspects. The highest universal powers will communicate themselves to you to help you discover your most destructive, ignorant side, which needs insight, purification, and change. Through your willingness to accept your lower self, the higher self will become more of a real presence in you. In fact, you will increasingly experience it as your real self. So the despair about being bad, weak, inadequate will fall by the wayside. And this I think is also part of, like, as we do this, we increasingly sort of metamorphose into the butterfly rather than the caterpillar, and more of our higher self capacities come online. We have a greater grounding and a more mature adult presence. And when something shakes it and, activates the child, we know how to be there for that. And so says many people meditate, but they neglect the two sides of the endeavor and miss out on integration. They may indeed actualize some of the universal powers that come into play wherever the personality is sufficiently free, positive, open, but the unfree, negative, closed areas are neglected. The actualized universal powers will not by themselves enforce an integration with the undeveloped part of the self. And that's basically what we're trying to do. The conscious ego self must decide for this integration and fight for it. Otherwise, the universal self cannot get through to the blocked off areas. So this is where, also in this meditation, literally your present awareness of your ego self in the body, where those blocked off areas are, allows the universal self to penetrate there, literally, right? So it's why kind of bringing our attention into these places, into the moment, like literally can bring, higher self energies and clearings and, revelations in with it. So partial integration alone with the universal self may lead to even greater self-deception if the consciousness is diluted by the actually existing partial integration with divine powers and becomes more prone to overlook the neglected side. This makes for lopsided development. The next step in meditation is to re-educate the destructive infant that is now no longer entirely unconscious. And this is where we really have to make this connection with this other being to help it, right? So this is where I think also what Frank was saying, we have to kind of, because what the infant is used to relating to is this kind of, battle with the idealized self-image. And so we have to become another presence and in a way sort of hold both, because really the idealized self-image is also a terrified child aspect if you look underneath all of its bluster and demand. So, there's kind of like two child parts trying to feel safe, right? And what they need is, our presence, the presence of this mature adult, that is learning its way, is not, doesn't have it all down, but has access to divine help, right? And that's what it means to be, healthily human being, I think. Re-education cannot take place unless you're fully aware of every aspect of this destructive infant's beliefs and attitudes. So again, that's where we draw out and truly deeply listen and learn to understand. This is why the first part of meditation, the revealing exploratory phase, is so fundamental. It goes without saying that the first phase is not something one gets over with. so that then the second and later third phase can begin. It's not a sequential process. The phases overlap. Exploration, understanding, and re-education often go hand in hand, while at other times they must proceed separately. And you kind of cultivate the sensitivity to this, it's like in the moment, you learn how to follow, and this is also part of this inner meditation and being in the present, with the process that you're in and listening. So it is easy to look past what is stagnant in you, even if the first meditation approach is used properly and you are capable of seeing new aspects of the destructive child in you. The second part of the process may be neglected. An understanding of the causes and effects may not be worked through. And I find this is so important, because if that's not the case, then I don't think we really can, fully embrace ourselves, right? And fully understand and have the respect and the compassion for our full being. So perhaps the third aspect of re-education, is not taken where we look at understanding more deeply. When you go through the entire process, a tremendous strengthening of your whole self takes place. Several things begin to happen within your personality, my friends. In the first place, your conscious ego personality itself becomes stronger and healthier. It will be stronger in a good, relaxed sense, with more determination, awareness, meaningful directedness, and a greater power of concentration and one-pointed attention. Second, you will cultivate a much greater self-acceptance and understanding of reality. Unreal self-hate and self-disgust will go away. Equally, unreal claims for specialness and perfection also go away. False spiritual pride and vanity, as well as false self-humiliation and shame, disappear. Through the steady activation of the higher powers, the self feels less and less forlorn, helpless, lost, hopeless, or empty. The whole sense of the universe, in all its marvelous possibilities, reveals itself from within, as the reality of this wider world shows you the way to accept and change your destructive inner child. This gradual change enables you to accept all your feelings and let the energy flow through your being. So here's where he now is starting to bring this into an energetic and bodily kind of level as well. And so, he doesn't neglect it entirely and makes these illusions, right? And when we can accept all of our feelings, it's part of like in the moment being with the energies that are there. And when it's harder to accept like the feeling, that says though, with the interpretation that is not self-accepting. So, I feel terrible because I, did it wrong, or I feel like I should have been better or something like that. And that's really a different kind of feeling than just being with sort of the, bottomless pit in your stomach, or the, place where you feel like you want to cry, or whatever is there inside, right? The agitation or the pressure, right? All of those things, we can simply be with those energies. And as we accept them, be with them, listen to them, and kind of feel, okay, where are they blocked? Can I open a channel for them? Can I relax this muscle? What happens if I do? So we can work in this way that, opens the flow. And when the flow opens, all of a sudden, all of the information comes, because the information is in energy, right? And so when the energy is moving again, then, we get clear, we see, we understand, right? And we may have some understanding beforehand, but that takes us all the way to the bottom, I think, and really clarifies it. So when you're let's see, this gradual change enables you to accept all of your feelings and let the energy flow through your being. When your small, petty, mean side is accepted without thinking that it is the total, final reality, Then the beauty, love, wisdom, and infinite power of the superior self become more real. This power cannot lead to unrealistic arrogance, specialness, and self-idealization when you are constantly dealing with your lower self. Such an attitude leads to balanced development, integration, and a deep, reassuring sense of your own reality. Realistic, well-founded self-liking must result. When you see the truth in yourself and it becomes second nature to want and commit yourself to this truth, you will detect an ugly side in you, which until this point you were too resistant to see. Simultaneously, you will also detect this great universal spiritual power that is in you, and that in fact is you. Paradoxical as it may seem, the more you can accept the mean little creature, the ignorant little infant in you without losing your sense of self-worth, the better you will perceive the greatness of your innermost being, provided you truly do not use your discoveries about the little self to beat yourself down. The little self wants to seduce the conscious ego to stay within the narrow confines of neurotic self-beating, hopelessness, and morbid capitulation, which always covers unexpressed hatred. The conscious ego must prevent this stagnation using all its knowledge and resources. Observe this habit of self-beating, hopelessness, and capitulation in yourself and counteract it, not by pushing it underground again. Like oftentimes we see it, we're doing it again, like, go away, or we want to get rid of it, right? There's what happens is just the reflexive impulse, whatever something is to run or fight with it, to get rid of or, get away from it. And so both of those energetic responses to it, right, will never work. We have to learn, and this is why it helps me on the energetic level too, to kind of imagine being present and being a container, a cocoon, a presence of embracing, right? And counteracting the energetic tendency to judge, to pull away, to, run or fight with it. And just be with it, breathe it. Sometimes it's painful, or feelings come with it, so sometimes just breathing energetically with it helps. So is this making any sense to people, like as I try to describe this energetic level, or is it kind of just, we could try maybe even going in and experiencing a little directly if you want.
What comes up for me is the idea that, meditation, quote, is supposed to like be a turning off of your monkey brain, but this is
the guide. Yeah.
But this is not turning off your monkey brain.
Yes, it is. It actually is. That's the difference. When you shift to the present moment sensory, you are also turning off your monkey brain. But it's a different form than using a mantra or because now what your focus of attention is not in thoughts, not in projection of, story, but right here, right now in the feeling. And out of that sometimes comes information, like I said, but it's different than your monkey mind. Does that make sense, or did I interrupt you?
Part of it makes sense, but it also makes turning off your monkey brain sound like a meditation bypass in a way.
Well, I would say that's true. I think, in some ways but most true meditation studies, that's kind of the beginning practice of concentration, but that's not ultimately like, that it is an allowing the unconscious to arise and meeting it without grasping or attach, so, you can't really shut off the monkey mind. It's not possible, so it's kind of more like how you can develop the conscious presence of awareness to it without getting lost in it, because it just kind of, it possesses us and takes us, we think it's us, right? And then we, instead of observing it, we're, identified with it. So
Yeah, there's a part of me that wants to call this a contemplation instead of a meditation.
That could well be. That could well be. Mhm.
And the meditation that I might actually someday be able to achieve would be like a peaceful moment of hearing more than I'm used to hearing, like in terms of, spirit and nature and such.
Yeah. Receptive, right?
Yeah,
Deep
yeah,
receptivity that opens, and all of a sudden something touches you that hadn't been.
yes, yes.
So I can't remember where we were. Observe this. Okay, we were taught. So we're like trying to observe the awareness of kind of how we're not in very good harmony with ourselves, right? And we're always beating on ourselves, and so talking to this part of yourself, you can bring to bear on it all the knowledge of your conscious ego. And then, if this is not sufficient, we can request the powers beyond. And I find that this is very effective and very real, right? Like oftentimes I'm, working with, trying to re-educate it. And then I realize, well, I'm kind of on your side. I don't know anything beyond what you understand. And that's kind of where I'm stuck too. So let's go, ask the divine. And then if I, open up to that, oftentimes what will come in is, an understanding, a realization, some kind of, oftentimes even it'll take me deep into just releasing some old feeling, and out of that comes also a new awareness. So, but new awareness comes from, this requesting and this receptivity to it. And so a lot of, I think, where we are now really in our journey is trying to learn to access that and open and work with it more and more. So I think it's important to review this lecture and to kind of maybe dedicate ourselves to, especially, trying to contact guidance, being seeking this support and connection with that super conscious part of ourselves. So another important aspect of getting to know both the lowest and the highest in you is that you realize the function, the capacities, but also the limitations of the conscious ego. On the conscious level, the ego's function is wanting to see the full truth of both the lowest and the highest in you, wanting with all of its strength to change and give up destructiveness. The limitation is that the ego consciousness cannot execute this alone. This is why we often despair, because we're trying to do it all by ourselves, and must turn for help and guidance to the universal self. And then, this is the hard part, wait patiently without doubting or impatiently pushing. This waiting needs an open attitude about the way the help might manifest. And this is a very hard, in some ways I feel like this is kind of a dark night of the senses, this part of sometimes when we've done a lot of work and we've asked, and it's a real important thing that we're trying to break through, and it doesn't seem to be happening, and we don't know why, we've done everything we know and we're just waiting, right? And it is, it's like you even have to give up sort of the pushing, but the inner impatience can't quite let go. It's like it can't come to rest, can't be at peace without this thing in some way. And so, these kinds of things, this waiting, like we have to kind of try to cultivate, and sometimes it's helpful to practice before we're in one of those intense situations. It needs an open attitude about the way the help might manifest. We need to cultivate kind of the breathing, the patience, the trust. The guide says in another lecture, we would all be patient if we knew the results were certain, right? It's this place where we are not sure that we can manifest or we can take, bring this into our lives. And so this is where development of faith, I think, comes in. And also as we age and maybe have experienced also our own, like going through the eyes of needles or going through passages, coming out the other side, and crises that we thought would take us into, terrible places, but we managed to be okay. that there's a kind of faith that can build in us over time, with our going through these life experiences and stories, because they usually don't work out quite as badly as we fear and imagine in some way. The fewer preconceived notions one has, the faster spiritual help will come forth and be recognizable. So if we're open, it comes in all different ways. He's saying, I think he says here, okay, well, let's just name some, like a lot of times, people come to us, and maybe they were sent by spirit, with the answer, or maybe in nature work, a lot of times people receive answers from nature in different ways. And of course there's, meditation or automatic writing, or just, writing down, meditation for 3 voices, that kind of thing. But doing tarot deck cards, using pendulums, or, different ways of asking yes or no questions, all of these things are useful, just even in, because we're asking, we're seeking, and we're trying to learn from spirit, how we can be in touch, we can make that connection. But again, this open waiting, accepting, and positive attitude is necessary. And recognizing the absence of that can also become a constructive acknowledgement of where the self is at the moment. There are many different kinds of meditation. And this is kind of what, to your point, I think maybe, Frank, there's religious meditation, which consists of reciting set prayers. There's meditation in which the main emphasis is put on increasing the powers of concentration. In another type of meditation, spiritual laws are contemplated and thought through. There is meditation in which the ego is made totally passive and willless, and the divine allowed its own flux. These and other forms of meditation may have more or less value, but my suggestion to the friends who work with me is to use the available energy and time for confronting the part of the self that destroys happiness, fulfillment, and wholeness. You can never create the wholeness you truly aspire to, whether or not this aim is articulated, if you bypass this confrontation. So now it kind of gets back into this confrontation attitude in language, and it always puzzles me a little bit because it's not quite how I see it. I can, in some ways, I think, you have to have courage, you have to have strength, you have to face it, sometimes, which is difficult, but it also feels like to create this wholeness, we have to embrace it all, right? So it's in some ways a confrontational embrace. I don't know. See if you want to play with that. This approach includes giving voice, absolutely, to the recalcitrant aspect of the egotistical, destructive self that denies happiness, fulfillment, and beauty for inner reasons. And so here I want to add, and also, like when we go into the body and we feel the contraction in the body, or the heaviness in the body, or the agitation, or all of these unpleasant kind of sensations energetically that are, connected with every thought and feeling that we have, and, are, part of the, I think probably the chemical soup that's coming through and causing health issues maybe too. But, the main thing is that we're, feeling and, kind of exploring these blocks and realizing. So he says in other lectures, right, that pleasure is expansion, right? Fulfillment, happiness is opening, is expansion, right? So wherever we're doing any kind of closing energetically inside, and we can feel it in the body a lot of times, especially the habitual places, where we've just, kind of gotten stuck for a long time in some tension and holding, and or temporary places. And where that holding is, it's another form of understanding, oh, that's a recalcitrant aspect of this egotistical destructive self. So how do we give voice to the contracted, holding places? We don't have to imagine what part of our child this is, right? We can go directly into the energy consciousness that's right there in the body. And I find that that also does really help us calm and still, the overactive mental body that's trying to figure it out and tell the story and, all of that. This way we feel it out and we learn directly in the moment through the experience. So far, we have discussed two phases of the meditation process. First, the recognition of the unconscious, destructive, egotistical self, and then the understanding of the underlying misconceptions, the causes and effects, the meaning and the price to be paid for the present destructive attitudes. The third phase is the reorientation and re-education. So once we've understood, like what it believes, where it, why it's adapted this adaptation basically to trauma, then we can begin to seek truth and seek another alternative, because we know whatever that adaptation to trauma has a price to pay, and it doesn't work very well in the long run. And so we now want to seek within ourselves and to our higher self, what's a different way, and how can we then bring that knowledge, that understanding, that truth, and support the self to change, to transform, to try different things, to catch itself. And sometimes it just kind of almost happens spontaneously, that we all of a sudden look back and, I was doing that differently, right? I don't know if you've ever had that feeling, right? You don't or you don't even know when it stopped, but you can remember a long time ago, yeah, I used to be this way. So there's, sort of almost this gradual ongoing transformation that is happening just through the conscious awareness. But also maybe, there's deeper levels of healing and releasing and connection around the trauma that can be done at this phase. What I say now must be taken with great care, otherwise the subtleties involved will not be communicated. Re-education might very easily be misinterpreted and lead toward a renewed suppression or repression of the destructive part that is beginning to unfold. You have to take great care and deliberately aim to avoid this without allowing the destructive part to engulf you. This is where, I think if we can identify with, the adult and the higher self, and be a container, a cocoon, a space of, presence, of holding for whatever the destructive part, its belief, its energy, its, way that it wants to act out, whatever. So the best attitude toward the unfolding destructive part is one of detached observation, of unjudging, unharried acceptance. I would say even curiosity, right? Hi, I see you. Who are you? I want to understand you and learn. The more it unfolds, the more you must remind yourself that neither the truth of its existence nor its destructive attitudes are final. They are not the only attitudes you have, nor are they absolute. Above all, you have the power inherent in you to change anything. You may lack the incentive to change when you are not fully aware of the damage the destructive part of you does to your life when it does go unrecognized. It is therefore another important aspect of this phase of the Pathwork meditation to look deeply and widely for indirect manifestations. How does unexpressed hate manifest in your life? Perhaps by feeling undeserving and afraid, or by inhibiting your energies. This is only one example. All indirect manifestations have to be explored. It is important here to remind yourself that where there is life, there is constant movement, even if this movement is temporarily paralyzed. Matter is paralyzed life stuff. The frozen blocks of energy in your body are momentarily hardened, immobilized life stuff. This life stuff can always be made to move again, but only consciousness can do it. So that's this presence, right? If we can bring our conscious presence into the body where the, hardened, immobilized life stuff is, however we experience it. It could be in some place in illness, right? Physical illness is really that, but it also goes more subtle. For life stuff is filled with consciousness as well as energy. Whether this energy is momentarily blocked and frozen or whether this consciousness is momentarily dimmed does not matter. Meditation must mean above all that the part of you that is already conscious and moving actually intends to make blocked energy and dimmed consciousness moving and aware again. The best way to do this is to allow the frozen and dimmed consciousness, first of all, to express itself. So maybe it's, tight, like let it be tighter, and encourage it to, and then see, like, well, is, what does it want to say from inside, fuck you or get away, or I don't know, like there's, ways that we can encourage all of this. And you need a receptive attitude instead of a reaction that what comes forth is devastating and catastrophic. And I don't know if any of us would quite go to that level, but, sometimes people do, right? They're really horrified about this, parts of themselves. And, often it's on a more subtle level where we, simply, reject or dismiss or, don't tolerate, don't get curious, don't welcome in, all of these parts. The panicky attitude toward one's own unfolding destructive infant does more damage than the destructive infant itself. You must learn to listen to it, to take it in, to calmly receive its expressions without hating yourself, without pushing the infant away. Only with such an attitude can you come to understand the causes of its underlying destructiveness. Only then can the process of re-education begin. So, here in a way, he's saying we have to do this, you must, but it's like, again, like if we can't, like if we notice that, we still hate ourselves, we do want to push the infant away, like don't think that, then you're stuck, right? That just means that that's where the work starts, right? So let that part express, right? And back up a little bit, you're just getting ahead of yourself. You're trying to bypass and you'll feel it, right? So go stay with where you are. That's why it's also important to, I think, be in the present moment in our bodies, in the energy, because we don't jump around. We just stay right in the process. The denying, panicky, frightened, self-rejecting, and perfection-demanding attitude you usually have makes every part of this meditation impossible. It does not permit unfoldment. It does not permit exploration of the causes of what might be unfolded, and it certainly does not permit re-education. It is the accepting and understanding attitude that enables the conscious ego to assert its benign dominion over violently destructive and stagnant psychic matter. It's a very important thing to sense into, right? It's like it is that accepting and understanding attitude that enables the conscious ego to assert. And this is what we need to do, is like we're trying to kind of become the parent, over all of these parts of us, or become that integrating, wise, guide, that also has its guides that it calls on as needed, right? And that's the part that needs to, like the child needed, was somebody to try to help it, to hold it when it was hurting, to help it understand what just happened, to guide it as we go. And so when we can assert that within ourselves again, and that we have this loving, compassionate, understanding, accepting, attitude towards it, then these parts, the child parts, are seeking and want and will allow that dominion over them. And that's a part of what transforms some of these things that seem so impossible to change as well. So it's compassion, it's love, it's acceptance, it's understanding that is such an answer here. And we often know that towards each other in some way, but we don't always know that towards ourselves. As I have said many times, kindness, firmness, and deep determination against your own destructiveness are necessary. It is a paradox. Identify with the destructiveness and yet be detached from it. I would say identify it, identify the destructiveness, and don't identify with it, right? So that allows a certain detachment. Accept that it is you, but also know that there is another part of you that can say the final word if you so choose. So again, you don't, deny that it's something, connected with you, that you feel, that you want, that, but again, there's a larger capacity to choose and to make a deeper decision instead of just the kind of unconscious reaction that most of the time the defenses are coming from. So for this, you need to widen the limitations of your conscious ego expressions to include saying at any moment, I will be stronger than my destructiveness and will not be hampered by it. I determine that my life will be at its best and fullest, and that I will and can overcome the blocks in me that make me want to remain unhappy. This determination of mine will bring in the higher powers that will make me capable of experiencing more and more bliss, because I can let go of the doubtful pleasure of being negative, which I now fully recognize. So, even in in our work, like where we feel the contraction, where we feel the negativity, again, to bring it out, to fully recognize and to deeply understand it. And then we can, like make a different choice by holding the hand, the one that's kind of clinging to that negative, doubtful pleasure, but we can guide it, and it trusts us. We're no longer its enemy, right? And we can lead it. And we also can connect it to the higher self. So this is the task of the conscious ego. Then and then only can it also call into play the powers of guidance, wisdom, strength, and a new inner feeling of love that comes from being penetrated by the universal self. And this is also very important, like when we have that new inner feeling of love that comes from being penetrated by the universal self. It's really, part of the kind of gradual, stepping into the supportive and benign universe and knowing that, like we care about ourselves, but God cares about us. It's like the love of God that's what makes us happy. And when we know that we are worthy of God's love, even in our imperfection, even in our, outright belligerence, then, it's like we can always go back, and ask for that help, like when we think God's judging us, then we have to run away. And when we put a judge inside of our own consciousness and we think that's God. And so we can't connect with the inheritance and the blessed grace that's available for us. So this part to me is also so important, to try to connect with. And it, again, we can only prepare the ground, for it to happen, but the universe is there meeting us every way and wants to take us there. So our job is just to keep doing the work. Re-education, too, has to proceed through the relationship of the three interactive levels, just as it was necessary for making the destructive side conscious and exploring its deeper meaning. Re-education depends on efforts of both the ego consciousness with its instructions and dialogue with the ignorant child, and on the intervention and guidance of the universal spiritual self. Each in its own way will affect the gradual maturing of this infant. The ego determines its goal to change the consciousness of the negative inner child by wanting this and committing itself to it. This is its task. Full execution of this task is made possible, I would say, only by the spiritual influx from the deeper personality that has to be deliberately activated. Here, the consciousness must again adopt a twofold approach. One is activity that asserts its desire to transform the self-defeating aspects. Every little thing that we, every effort that we give, we can be met with. And all the choice, right, that we can muster. So one is activity that asserts its desire to transform the self-defeating aspects, leading the dialogue, calmly but firmly instructing the ignorant child. The other is a more passive patient waiting for the final, always gradual manifestation of the universal powers. It is they who bring the interchange when the feelings lead to new, more resilient reactions. Thus, good feelings will replace those which were negative or dead. So again, I think he's talking almost shamanically or spiritually, and like it is they who bring the interchange. So again, we have this choice and this, attempt to, activate, but we also have to wait for something larger to carry us, to this, to connect with us. And so this larger spiritual, help is available, and it's they who can bring about the interchange. That it's sort of like they bring these feelings that are different than the old ones that we always used to go to. And they, I think, really literally hold at bay those old feelings that are part of our habit. They're sort of our addiction. And I think one of the ways that our spiritual guides help us is when we ask them, they kind of protect us from old habit addiction patterns, right? And can get a little space, a little break. We ultimately have to, embody it, do it ourselves. But sometimes that initial process, and sometimes they can bring, significant, healing around those kind of habits and addictions. And I think a lot of the interchange that we're talking about, really comes from some of that. So again, I guess what I'm saying is that we don't really fully understand the importance of the higher self and the spirit world in this process, but it's real, and we can activate it. It's probably just by trying it and, even imagining it, it's better than, nothing. Because even though, we don't know it's happening, my guess is if you ask, it's happening. And then more and more you will begin to receive it and understand it and experience it. But for a while, have faith. If you ask, it's happening, and then have that patience to see what the results might be. What I often have observed in those kind of situations is I'll get the teaching, and the clarity, and then I will get a very gentle test. It'll be a pretty simple one, and it'll be pretty close to after I just got the truth, or the integration piece, and then I'll usually get that one right, and good girl, I did it, like I caught it, I did saw it. And then I'll kind of go unconscious after that. And then there'll be another test and I'll completely blow it. And I'll be back in the whole other, process of the old trauma and that kind of thing. But it's kind of like we get it, we lose it, and we get it again. And each time we strengthen and internalize it, impress it even more. Brushing and pressuring the resisting part is as useless and ineffective as accepting its direct refusal to budge. And this is kind of our conundrum, right? It's like we get stuck in, we know it's there. We can't seem to get rid of it, right? We want to make it go away, and then I think the only other option is just, to let it be there. And that also doesn't work, right? So this is kind of the cross that we're on with that. And so this is a good example of like asking the higher self, wow, what else do you do? Like I only see these two sides, right? And so, he says, when the conscious ego does not recognize that there is a part of the self that actually refuses every step toward health, unfoldment, and the good life, a counteractive movement may be one of hurried, impatient pressure. So both derive from self-hate. And when you feel stymied and hopeless, take it as a sign for you to search for that part in you that says, I don't wish to change. I don't want to be constructive. And then you want to ask, well, why not? Right? Set out and find this voice. Use the meditative dialogue here again to explore and let the worst in you express itself. Can you see, my friends, and how expressing the negative part, exploring its meaning, cause and effect, and re-educating it must be a constantly fluctuating process, alternating and often simultaneous. See how the three levels of interaction combine in the effort of purification and integration. Meditation functions here as a constant articulation of what was previously unarticulated. And this is, again, the guide often says that our feelings are unthought thoughts, right? And by here again, I think he means like these energetic sensory experiences, that we call feelings. There's feelings and emotions, and I usually use the word feeling to describe, more just the sensory aspect of the energy. So oftentimes we are sitting in that energy, listening to that energy, paying attention to that energy. And it's almost as if by focusing there and attending to it, somehow articulation begins to happen, word forms behind it or something. There's actually a psychologist by the name of Gendlin who wrote about this in the 70s, I think, and he called it focusing. And he talked about, going in and just, being in that energy sensory environment in the body, and that it begins to name itself, and articulate itself. It's a threefold communion and confrontation, from the ego toward the destructive self, and from the ego toward the universal self, so that the universal self can affect both the ego and the destructive self. Your own sensitivity will grow day by day to feel what exactly is needed at any given point on your evolutionary path. Each day brings forth new tasks, exciting tasks, beautiful tasks. They should not be approached in a spirit of wanting to get it over with, as if only then could life begin. On the contrary, the meditation process is living at its best. You may begin each meditation by asking yourself, what do I really feel at this moment about this or that issue? And again, you can ask and, go into your story, or you can ask and then drop into your body and notice that the answer that comes from there. And again, in what respect am I dissatisfied? Well, how do you know you're dissatisfied, right? There's a feeling in your body of that dissatisfaction. Where does it live? What does it feel like? And again, we can't always describe the feelings, sometimes metaphors, sometimes, but we can ask the question and know it in our being. What is it I may be disregarding is another question. Then you may request the universal spirit in you to help you find these particular answers. Wait trustingly for what may unfold. Only when some part of you unfolds can you have a direct communication, confrontation, or dialogue with it and ask it further questions, as well as instruct it. With patience and determination, you can remold the distorted part, but only after it has fully expressed itself. And that's important too. Like, we don't want to, we have to receive it. It can't change unless it is fully received as it is. This is so important of any being, of anything that, is in the psyche, right? So, and you can understand that maybe even, to empathize with that in your own self, right? Because anything that, you feel like you're left holding unexpressed, you so much want, you feel like you can't really be received unless it's all expressed. So we have to fully receive it and welcome it, and also, try to deeply understand it. And then we can reorient that stagnant psychic energy. And it's also, from our willingness to be totally honest and constructive, loving and open. And if you find an unwillingness in this regard, then, that's just where the work starts. And it must be also confronted, explored, and re-educated. This is the only meaningful way in which meditation can move your life toward the resolution of problems, toward growth and fulfillment, and toward unfolding your best potential. If you do this, my friends, the time will come when trusting life will no longer sound like a vague, faraway theory, that you cannot put into personal action. Instead, your trust in life, as well as self-love in the healthiest sense, will fill you more and more based on realistic considerations instead of wishful thinking. The paradoxes and opposites that you constantly deal with in life will be reconciled. This is important, particularly when you meditate on this threefold interaction within you, because it's like that's where the splits are. And if we can like listen to the voices, we often there's this, like both sides have divinity and distortion, and we can search out, and listen to both sides and then seek to understand, okay, where's the truth in that? But where is it off? How is it somehow not quite aligned spiritually? So now he's going to discuss a few of these kind of important paradoxes. He says, and this was the lecture that we read earlier, for instance, let's examine the paradox of desire. Both desire and desirelessness are important spiritual attitudes. Only to the dualistic separated mind do they seem like opposites leading to confusion about which is right or wrong. Human beings desire, for only desire can bring you to the fourth aspect of meditation. This is the expansion of your conscious concepts in order to create new and better life substance, hence life experience. This is the creation I have spoken about in previous lectures. If you do not desire a better state of being and more fulfillment, you will have no material to create and mold life substance. Visualization of a fuller state presupposes desire. These concepts must be fostered by the conscious ego, and the universal consciousness must intervene to help create a more expanded state. If you see desire and desirelessness as mutually exclusive, you cannot grasp or feel the necessary attitude. Desire must exist for one to believe in new possibilities and to unfold into greater states of fulfillment and self-expression. But if desire is tense, urgent, and contracted, it forms a block. Such desire implies, I do not believe that what I want can happen. So there's the forcing current, there's the tension, there's the intensity, which the guide says is an obstacle to self-realization. So we don't believe that what we want can happen, which is perhaps the result of really an underlying, I really do not want it, maybe because of some misconception or unjustified fear, or maybe an unwillingness to pay the price. So what he's naming here is that oftentimes we have an outer yes, in a part that says, I want it. And that's good. But if it's not happening, or we can feel in our body as we affirm and align that yes, and say that yes, often we can sense energetically like little places of resistance, little inner no currents, that are not on board. And so those are also, again, you can feel them in your body. You can go explore them there. Who are you? Why are you saying no? What are you afraid of, or what are you feeling? And, or we can, again, maybe search in the history or the, that kind of thing. But I find, that again, the expansion and the yes current and the contraction and the no current are right here in our body with us, and very easily accessible, and contain everything that we need to understand if we focus there. So the underlying desire creates two tints of desire. Therefore a kind of desirelessness must be present. And that could be expressed as a statement, I know I can and will have such and such, even if it is not realizable right now in this or that specific form. I trust the universe and my own goodwill sufficiently that I can wait and will strengthen myself along the way to cope well with the temporary frustration of this desire. So can you feel that? I don't know, if people are in touch with those places inside that, have the forcing current sometimes, but if we can speak to those places, and kind of calm and soothe them and remind them, this is the truth. We bring the truth. not just, a disembodied truth somewhere out there that we have a conceptual knowledge of. We got to bring it into the body, and we got to offer it to these places of energy, of contraction, of resistance that we're in touch with. And so, as we speak those words, right, we can tell, how is there a reaction? Do they buy that? Does that help? Right. So again, I know I can and will have such and such my desire. But even if it's not realizable right now in this or that specific form, I trust the universe and my own goodwill sufficiently that I can wait, and I will strengthen myself along the way, both, strengthen in many ways probably, but certainly to cope well with the temporary frustration of this desire. So that's a very powerful approach. What are the common denominators of healthy desire and healthy desirelessness that make meditation and indeed all life expression real and beautiful? First, there is an absence of fear and the presence of trust. If you fear frustration, unfulfillment, and their consequences, the tension of your soul movement will prohibit the fulfillment, right? Eventually, you will even give up all desire. And then desirelessness will be distorted, misunderstood, and of the wrong kind, because too much tense desire is actually present. In the final analysis, such tense desire comes from fear caused by the infantile belief that you will be annihilated if you do not have what you want. So this is the death, right? Like the shaman's death, in some ways that sometimes we have to go through to get rid of this tense desire, right? We have to actually go into the feeling of the death of not having it. And once we can surrender and feel that sacrifice, then we actually open and can receive it. But until we've actually, this guide is always saying that if we're defending against a feeling, right, we can't have its opposite until we can face and feel this other feeling. So, this death that we're going to be annihilated if we can't get what we want. If we can find this place of surrender and trust and acceptance of the death, and sometimes the pain of it, sometimes the grief of it, sometimes the anguish of not having it right now, but ultimately having this faith, right? That, there will be a resurrection, there will be another side, and we just kind of keep going. So hence, when we don't trust our ability to cope with lack of fulfillment, that makes us inordinately frightened of it. And then when we're afraid of it, then we are tense and we're contracted and we can't risk and we can't, everything that we need to expand into life goes in the opposite direction. So the vicious circle continues. The fear induces a cramp that becomes a denial of desire. These very subtle, obscure attitudes need to be explored in your meditation so that you can come to the fourth stage of meaningful meditation. In this stage, you express your desire with confidence. And this, he has another lecture on it, I think, on the impressing, right? In your ability to cope with both fulfillment and non-fulfillment, and therefore with a benign universe capable of yielding to you what you long for. And a lot of times we're actually afraid of getting what we want, right? So we always have to kind of look at these deeper levels. The obstacles along the way can be dealt with when you know that the ultimate state of bliss will be yours anyway. Then desire and desirelessness will not be inconceivable paradoxes, but complementary attitudes. Similarly, it seems paradoxical to postulate that both involvement and detachment must exist in the healthy psyche. And again, there must be a twofold approach to understanding this seeming contradiction. If detachment is indifference because you are afraid to be involved and unwilling to risk pain and scared of loving, then detachment is a distortion of the real attitude. if involvement means merely an expression of a super tense will that your infantile existence on having what you want right away generates, then the healthy, productive version of involvement is inverted. So, good examples of, distortion and divinity in these, in where it's split. So wherever there's a split, this happens, and we, have to find the truth and the confusion in both sides. I would choose a third example of apparent obstacles that make a comprehensive whole when not distorted. Let us take the inner attitudes of activity and passivity. On the dualistic level, these two seem to be mutually exclusive. How can you be both active and passive in a harmonious way? The right inner interaction includes both these inner movements. For instance, meditation, as I have explained it here, must include both. You are active when you explore your inner levels of consciousness. You are active when you commit yourself and struggle to recognize and overcome resistance. You are active when you question yourself further to let the previously unadmitted destructive side express itself. You are active when you have a dialogue and re-educate the infantile, ignorant aspects of yourself. You are active when you use your ego consciousness to enlist the help of the spiritual consciousness. You are active when you create a new concept of life experience as opposed to an old limiting one. When the ego deals with both other universes to establish a connection, you are active. But you must also learn to wait passively for the unfoldment and expression of both these other levels. Then the right blend of activity and passivity prevails in the psyche. And sometimes I'll go in and I'm listening, right? And it takes a while to even connect with my energies, to be present, to hear, to listen, to encourage them to speak. It takes them a while to come out, and so there's, connections that have to be made, and, lots of things going on in this whole journey that are way beyond our understanding, to answer the request, the spirit world may have to, like prepare a whole new, level of work for us to go through something, some block or something to get to that level. So, it's the prayer is always being answered. It just always cannot be answered immediately. And so this is where we have to kind of rest in this passivity and trust and patience. The universal powers cannot come to fruition in a human being unless both the active and the passive movements are present. These are very important concepts to understand, to use, and to observe within yourself. Find where they are distorted and where they are functioning well. When the three-way interaction within yourself takes place, there is always a harmonious blend between desire and desirelessness, between involvement and detachment, between activity and passivity. When this balance becomes a steady state, the destructive infant grows up. It is not killed or annihilated. It is not exorcised. Its frozen powers resolve themselves into live energy, which you will actually feel, my friends, as a new living force. This infant must not be slain. It must be instructed so that salvation can come to it, liberating it, bringing it to growth. If you work towards this goal, you will steadily move closer to unifying the ego level and the universal self. This is powerful material. Be blessed, be in peace, be God. Okay. So that's the lecture. I'm going to come out of the screen share here, I think. And oops, I wasn't sharing screen. I was. Let's see. So have I not been sharing the screen with you guys?
No, you have been sharing the screen.
Okay.
You need to come out of screen sharing.
Yeah, I can't seem to figure out how to come out now. Just says share another one.
Interesting.
Maybe this
has a mind of its own.
Darlene, I have a question.
Sure.
Can you So I'm not sure I fully understand the lecture.
Sure.
But can, like, core energetics, breath meditation, is all of that same thing here?
Yeah, in some ways you can use these things in that, but it's a little more, in a core energetics or a breath work, it's a kind of a way of inviting and exploring and asking, for, the unconscious material to surface, right? And I don't know if you would do a lot of active, in that moment, trying to work with it. But the beautiful thing is that then after you've had the experience, you can go back and sit with it, integrate it, because a lot of this is sort of integrative level of work. So there's the expressive part that you can maybe access in those things. I'm still trying to figure out how to get out of this. So does that help?
I'm not sure. I think I have to reread the lecture.
Well, there's a lot here in this lecture. It's not an easy lecture to understand. So, it's like, don't feel like you should get it all. The part that you're asking about, see if you can ask the question again in a different way and see if I can follow.
Well, okay, maybe this is a better question, because I've been doing Vipassana, which is, a Buddhist form of meditation. It is focusing on the breath. But if things pop up, let's say if I have thoughts, to sort of not to judge them and then go back to the breath.
Yes.
And what I was explaining, that sometimes if I have anger or urges, it's not necessarily my doing. It's, it could be conditioning from this year, from this birth, from lifetimes, is just to let it happen. And then once it passes, go back to the breath. So
exactly. And so this is the original mindfulness form, right? And it is very similar in a lot of ways, but there is this difference in the active re-education and work with it. So, it's kind of like the first couple of steps, maybe, and it's like, or at least, like the material comes up, but instead of sort of actively engaging with it, you're not rejecting it or anything, but, like you said, it's more like don't identify with it and just let it go. So,
yeah. And I mean, I must add that before, doing this type of meditation, I had to do a lot of, I did a lot of work with you. So I did a lot of where I couldn't even sit still. So.
Yeah. And all of it is good, like the guide says, like all meditation has value, and yeah, so it sounds like it's a good beginning. And then you can just see if you want to play with some of these other ways, or try to explore, letting, when you go in and you notice, or some thought comes up, like, and you want to, work with it a little bit, to.
So what does that mean when you say work with it a little bit?
Well, so again, the thoughts are a little different, So can you give me an example of a thought that might come up for you in a meditation?
Sure. When I first started doing this, my thoughts were they're just based on fear, right? Like, oh, this panel is gonna fall on you. Oh, your sister was sick, so this is gonna happen. And
Right.
some of them are so strong where I'm like, oh my God, I have to like open my eyes and check my phone.
Right. So, and it's really good just to have this practice of, like noticing the thought and not necessarily reacting to it, identifying, like that's a good practice. What you would do if you were going to take this a little further with what the guide is saying one way, I mean, there's ultimately more than one, but, like, so, that there's a kind of a fear demon that's constantly showing up in all of these different ways, right? So you might want to go in to, like, feel your fear in your body, like where does that show up, and kind of like be with it and explore, like, well, what does fear feel like, and if I stay with it and pay attention to it and invite it to speak, what has it got to say? Or if I breathe with it and I make space around it and invite it to move. Where will it move in my body to? And as it moves, what can I learn about it or express from it, or how can I follow it and discover where it's going? It's like there's all of these ways of interacting and learning more that is below the conscious awareness of the mind until we sort of start paying attention.
Hmm.
So does that help?
Yeah, I think so.
And you could talk to your fear and maybe like your fear would just, I mean, a lot of it is just feeling and tolerating the energy of fear in the body.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't do that before. I couldn't even close my eyes. So, okay.
But there may be also some other healing or awareness, like, oh, this fear ultimately believes that God's mad at me and so I'm going to get struck down or something, like
Yeah.
so that you can bring out the image, like the underlying confusion and the belief that's it's based in.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, I think that helps.
Okay, well, I finally figured out how to unshare. So anybody else with any last comments? I think we're time to wind up here. Well, thanks for participating. I hope this made sense. I mean, I know I'm kind of weaving in and out on two different levels in this lecture because I'm kind of bringing this other piece into it, but hopefully it had some usefulness. And, I just want to invite you to try to explore working with it on that level if it did make sense, and see how it goes.
Yeah, I will. Thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Darlene.
Night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you, Darlene. Good night, everyone.
Yeah, good night, Jacob.